Thank you for joining us today. My name is Beth Marsh, and I am the Director of Membership and Communications with the Organization of American Historians. We are joined today by 4 historians to talk about preparing for the non-academic job search. This webinar is part of our professional development series that is made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our next professional development webinar will be on June 7th at 3:30 p.m., and that will be on how to navigate the Freedom of Information Act request process. That will be opened for registration later this week. If you have questions during today's webinar, please use your Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions that aren't for one of the panelists, please direct them to either OAH staff or Sydney Siegel in the chat box, and we will help you with whatever's going on. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody for today. So our session today is moderated by Ayoka Wicks. She is a dual Ph.D. student in U.S. History and American Studies, as well as the current editorial assistant for The American Historian. Their research focuses on 20th and 21st century Indigenous activism and the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives movement. Our panelists include Dr. Evelyn Causey. She holds a PhD in history from the University of Delaware and has been the National Register Coordinator for the Alabama Historical Commission since 2020. Before joining the staff of the Alabama Historical Commission, she worked for more than a decade as a consultant, first for a firm and then independently. As a consultant, her work included historic context studies, walking tour brochures, and National Register of Historic Places and National Historic Landmark nominations. Our second panelist today is Dr. Rahima Schwenkbeck. She is the Director of Publications at the Policy Studies Organization. Her research interests include advertising, funerals, concepts of utopia, and business history. She has written on a range of topics, including radioactive landscapes, insane clown posse, and communal economics. Her book, The Business of Marketing, Entrepreneurship, and Architecture of Communal Societies in the 1960s and 70s, has just been released by Palgrave Macmillan. Our third panelist today is Dr. Edward Valentin, Jr. He is a historian and curator at the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington, D.C. Before joining the National Museum of the U.S. Navy, he worked as an interim and assistant curator at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum in Houston, Texas. He received his doctorate in history from Rice University in May of 2020. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Ayoka, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hopefully you all can hear me over my air conditioning that just kicked on. Oshio Ayoka Dagwara. Hi, my name is Ayoka, and I am zooming in today from the traditional and ancestral territory of the Miamiaki or Miami, Badwamnik or Potawatomi, Samoanwa or Shawnee, and Lenape or Delaware individuals. We recognize these tribes as the past, present, and future stewards of this land, and we encourage you, if you have a few extra dollars in your pocket, to donate any proceeds to either the Boarding School Survivors Fund or Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Activism. If you'd like a list of resources, I am happy to share those. I would also like to invite the ancestors on traditional territories that our panelists are zooming in, because there is few ethical actions on stolen land, but community is one of them. With that, I would like to ask each of our panelists to just speak a little bit about their background and how they got to their current position, and then we will kick off with discussion. So feel free to, as Beth mentioned, drop questions in the Q&A box, or at any point in time, I will also facilitate discussion. So let's start with Rahima.
Hi. So I actually have had this position since 2014. I got into this position. I've been working actually since I was undergrad. I worked full time. So for my little background spiel, I've actually been doing a lot of admin work. So having that background in conjunction with going to school full time gave me a nice backdrop of additional career opportunities. So when I was in my PhD program, I had a colleague who told me about this organization and said they might be interested in somebody with my skill set. So as somebody with a PhD or working on a PhD and also had a lot of admin experience and I also have a lot of IT experience, this turned out to be a great role. So I got very lucky. I've always had an interest in graphic design, web design, and things like that. So that helped, worked really well. And then I'm actually back in school again for web design and, to improve my coding skills. So that's how I'm at where I am. I really enjoy it. Like I said, I've been in this position since I wasn't before even I graduated. But instead of going to the job market, I realized I really enjoy what I do. And I was actually remote before COVID. So I absolutely love traveling. I'm actually coming in from, I'm actually in Brazil right now. So it's just lovely to be able to work full time and travel as much as I like and have a free schedule and just do what I like. So I'm very fortunate. So that's my story.
Thank you, Rahima. Evelyn.
So I went to graduate school actually thinking that I would go into museums and I would just get a master's. I decided to stay for a PhD, but I pretty quickly realized that teaching was not for me. I can do it. It's okay, but I don't thrive on it. And there are a lot of people who do and for whom that is their dream job. And I just didn't feel like that was my dream job. I was fortunate in my 5th year of graduate school to get a graduate assistantship at the University of Delaware Center for Historic Architecture and Design. And I had been studying material culture as my minor field. And so it was a good fit for me. I'd always loved historic buildings, and that introduced me to some more technical aspects of historic preservation and historic resource documentation, like how to write an architectural description, how to do deed traces on an individual property and then connect it to the larger historic context. I got some contract jobs doing historic preservation work while I was finishing my dissertation, and that developed into a part-time job with a small firm in DC. For me personally, that was actually helped me move my dissertation along because I didn't have all the time every day to work on my dissertation, which then quickly became not much time of the day getting done on my dissertation. And then that developed into a full-time job for a firm once I finished my doctorate. And I worked there and then was self-employed doing preservation consulting, everything from National Register nominations, and then finally kind of at the end of my consulting got into National Historic Landmark nominations, moved to Alabama from the DC area. And then in 2020, I applied for and accepted this job with the State Historic Preservation Office in Alabama, where I coordinate the National Register program and the Preservation Easement program. So that's how I got to where I am.
Awesome. And Edward.
First, thank y'all for having me. I started pretty early as well. From the day I began my doctorate at Rice in fall 2015, I always had some interest in public history or museum work of some kind. I didn't completely shut the door on academia, but I knew that the job market was pretty tough, and I liked the idea of really writing and working for a broader audience. I had a great history department, but it wasn't really set up that well to train graduate students in public history. But they were very supportive of me in my endeavors. And so basically I set up my own class in my second year and started working as an intern for 8 to 10 hours a week at the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, which was pretty close nearby. Learn the basics of museum work, collections management, writing interpretive texts, a lot of on-the-job training. When I got done with that year of class, they brought me on as a part-time employee. I guess I did a decent enough job for that. And I worked there for about 3 more years until I graduated and applied for the position I have now, which is, a curator at the National Museum of the U.S. Navy. And I've been working here for about 2 years. I actually specialize in 19th century U.S. history, so it's been a bit of a learning curve for me to learn some naval history, but it's been fun and really educational. And I'll just stop there before I start rambling.
Hey, rambling is welcome. Every scholar's love language is info dumping, right? It's not just the neurodivergence. Thank you all for letting us know how you got to where you are. The first question I want to ask, some of you actually kind of already answered, but for those of us who don't have a stellar graduate program that does let you know of these other opportunities, how do you find non-academic jobs right after PhD school?
I would say no. Oh, I was lucky in that my program, we actually took our coursework with both PhD and MA students. And it was great because a lot of MA students are writing, like they're 2 years and then they're planning to go into the workforce. So it's great, meet a lot of wonderful friends, and also heard a lot about different opportunities through them. So that was a helpful resource. And then I'm also glad to see that a lot of people in programs now going forward, that organizations like the Organization of American Historians is really working to put together programs like this and other resources to help people learn about how, different jobs. So it's nice that it's being framed not as like, oh, you didn't make the professorship or you didn't get into the teaching, here's some runner-up jobs. Like I think all three of us, I hope I can speak for everybody. We love our jobs. We're so happy. These are great, fulfilling jobs. And even though I love teaching, I really love traveling. So I would just say for somebody, if somebody's out there, it's okay. I think it's wonderful to be in a PhD program and know that, hey, maybe I decide, being a professor is not your end goal. That's great. I'm glad you're, whoever's in here thinking about different job opportunities. I would say hone on those, skills and interests they may have in addition to possibly teaching. You can see other people on this panel have wonderful skills as far as like architecture, learning those special skills, learning about museum studies, how to write scripts and things like this. So look for opportunities reach out to museums, reach out to firms, things like this that might be interested in your skill set.
Yeah, I would say, I think one of the themes that came across that I thought about, and then it came across in what Rahima and Edward talked about as well, is once you find the sort of the allied field where you want to use your PhD, you need to talk to people in that field and learn the skills that are specific to that field. I think at least in my field, you can't just walk into historic preservation and say, I have a PhD and I know how to do this now. The PhD is incredibly valuable. And we can talk more about sort of later, like why the PhD is valuable in our specific field. But there are other skills that you need to have, that you need to develop. But you learn what those are by talking to people. And it is really through those connections. I'm not naturally an outgoing person. And so, when people say you need to go out and network, it terrifies me. But networking doesn't have to be going up to people and being brash. It is just getting to know people and talking to people and asking them about their careers and making those connections, even if you're not expecting them to call you and give you a job. Someday they may, but it's just building a network of people, which is like networking, but it doesn't have to be intimidating. It's just getting to know people and making friends and acquaintances in the field where you want to be involved.
I don't have much to add. I completely agree. Getting to know the right people and kind of, sort of humbling yourself a little bit and getting in there to, learn those other skills. I didn't know anything about collections management or like writing a script or anything like that. I thought I was well prepared, but I just realized it's completely different. But just really just, getting to know people in the fields that you're interested in, as Rahima and Evelyn just said. So.
Excellent. At least two of you mentioned highlighting skills, and we have a MA student with a public history focus in the Q&A who would like to know, what practical skills do you think are lacking from applicants entering the public history job market? What sort of skills do they need to highlight?
I really think it's field specific. And I think this is one of the challenges. I kind of came through graduate school as public history graduate programs were proliferating. There were not very many when I came through graduate school. But I think one of the challenges of public history programs is becoming a jack of all trades and master of none. So it's hard to say like there are these skills that will get you a job in the public history field, because the public history field is so diverse. And you know, what I do on a day-to-day basis, what Rahima does, what Edward does are probably vastly different. And their core skills in terms of historical analysis, historical research, writing that are common to it. But beyond that, I think it is really field specific.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say for the person, maybe if they have a specific interest, if they're, you know, I'm not sure what their specific interest in public history is, or what, if they have like other additional interests or things like this. For example, you know, Lynn just already said, like, for example, for my job, if you're looking to do something I do, you really want to learn like SEO, like search engine optimization. You want to learn like coding. You want to, you know, so if and like even like playing with PDFs and things like this. So if that's not for you, that's great. That helps narrow down like, hey, I don't want to do this. Maybe you might decide to learn some, you know, different skills. If you're interested in a museum, maybe an internship might give you those skills to kind of figure out what it is you want to do. But I would just say maybe narrow down exactly where in public history you might want to, what you might want to do with that.
Totally agree. You know, definitely narrow it down and decide what you want to do. Just think about all the people that I work with at my museum, and you know, there's people that came through museum studies programs, and we all just have completely, I mean, work together really well. But there's just, you know, I'm more on the been able to really apply more of the research and writing stuff more directly. But you know, we have divisions that do more preservation, things like that, and their training and skill set is, you know, there's some overlap, but it's completely different from a lot of the things that I do.
Awesome. I want to offer congratulations to our next question author. They graduate with their MA in 2 to 3 weeks, so yay. But they would like to know, you know, what sort of advice do you have for students or graduates working in nonprofits, and also how to advance in those fields? I know, tough question. While you're chewing on that, I would also want to circle back to the question of why is the PhD important? You said you would circle back to that, Evelyn. So why is it important if you're not trying to be a professor?
For my field, it serves several purposes. I think when I was a consultant and I was going after projects, having those 3 letters after my name certainly, you know, I think put a stamp on my qualifications and gave me a little bit of an edge. I think now in my current position, it helps when I'm reviewing nominations written by professors and people with PhDs that I have one as well. But on a practical level, I guess it's a little bit what I do on a day-to-day basis. I do a lot of reviewing National Register nominations and helping preparers identify the historic context, develop those contexts, and articulate why a property is significant. I think just the breadth of knowledge of American history and the broad themes of American history that I gained through my comprehensive exam. So, you know, Ayoka is going through that now. It is useful. But being able to in my head say, oh, you know, this connects to this broader trend. Let's put those 2 together. The writing skills and also, you know, as a consultant, the practice in reading a secondary source and getting it down to 3 sentences. I used that skill a great deal. So I think so on a practical level, but also on a professional and prestige level, it has been very useful to me in my career.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'd say that, you know, PhD definitely lends the institution more credibility, which is a lot of times what they want. You know, you've done a lot of reading and writing, and, you know, some of these projects that you take on, whether you're working at museums or, you know, in a historical society, some of them are long, and they, you know, you have this proven track record of having been able to take on this long kind of research project, process information quickly. Those are useful skills that, you know, use everywhere.
All right, I'm going to take I'm going to try the question about the working at nonprofits. So I would say a couple tips for working at nonprofits. One is hopefully you have a great working environment and you enjoy working with your colleagues, so you can be feel comfortable being transparent about any benefits or pay. I know it seems like a taboo, but it seems, especially with the increasing amount of unionization back in the United States, that hopefully people feel more comfortable discussing that, especially if there's concerns that maybe you're not being fairly compensated or things like this. And as far as another thing you can do is always keep your, I would say always keep your CV updated. So, and keep up to date LinkedIn as well. So you can kind of keep your feelers out there in case just to keep opportunities open to you. It also helps you keep up to date with what current compensation packages are and things like that in the field. So that if there does arise an issue, you're at least aware of what's going on in the field, what the field looks like. And, also if you're thinking of making a job move, you can see what skill sets are needed for jobs you're looking for. So that can kind of help you keep abreast of trends and maybe take on the skill sets. So I hope that sort of helps answer your question.
Thank you for attempting to answer it. I really appreciate it. And I found that answer very helpful about sort of how to navigate. And especially I appreciated the union shout out, as you know, Indiana is currently fighting for our graduate workers union. But so once again, congratulating a graduate in the Q&A. Now, I sympathize with this question because Indiana University just this past year added our museum studies track. It was previously not an option, and only last fall did we actually have a class in it. But this question is, I want to work in museums. I never had museum studies, but I volunteered at a local history society. What do you suggest would be best to put one's best foot forward in entering the museum's job market?
I'm just going to say that person's doing fine. I never had formal history training, so it's all good. That practical experience matters, I think, more than the classwork. So they're doing the right thing by volunteering at the local historical society. Take on as much responsibility as you can, but don't let them exploit you either. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you're getting compensated for what you do. But I think the practical experience matters more than, say the credentials of a museum studies program. So that's just my take on it.
I'm going to speak to that one also briefly, because I did between college and graduate school, I worked in museums for municipally operated museums. And it was a group of museums all owned by the same municipal government. And I started out as an admin, split between two sites. They kept me on as an occasional tour guide, so receptionist person. So sometimes I'd give tours, sometimes I'd just be, selling trinkets in the gift shop. But that job, I would say, don't shy away from jobs like that, that you may think now you're overqualified for. I ended up not going to the museum field, but, at one point I filled in for the curator of education at one of the other museums because the person had gone on leave and they needed somebody to fill in, and I had experience doing tours. I knew the sites, and had I ended up going into museums, that would have been important experience to have, because I could say, yes, I have developed tour programs, I have scheduled tours, I've led school tours. Like you can get opportunities. Many times museums are small, and you can go in one position, but you will probably get opportunities to do work in other positions if you are motivated and interested in doing so.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I will save my personal museums question for the end, but there are plenty of questions in the chat. In fact, I want to combine a couple of questions here. The first one is mentioning sort of the biases that occur in the hiring process between humanities and social sciences. And so this person is asking, how do you get past those initial biases in the interview stage, in the resume stage, the cover letter, CV writing? all of that, how do you get past some of those? And if you also just want to add like tips on CV writing, I will also have that personal question. So CVs, resumes, interviews, biases, that's the question.
I haven't encountered in my field, I haven't encountered any biases against the humanities. What I think can comment on that that's related is I've gotten this is a state job, the one I have now, and with many state jobs and with federal jobs, you have to get past the gatekeeper who knows nothing about your field, who does not know what a PhD is, what's involved in that. So you really need to explicitly draw the connections between the skills you gained through getting your doctorate and the skills that are required for the job. You can't assume that because you have a PhD, it is unsaid. You don't need to say that you had to, collect and analyze documents. You need to spell that out because you've got to get past that gatekeeper, or you won't ever get to the point that the hiring official who knows your field and will say, oh yeah, if they have a PhD, I know they can do research. You got to get past that gatekeeper. So I would, be careful to identify how the skills you developed in the process of getting your doctorate connects to the skills they are asking for, and don't paraphrase. So this is not a cover letter, and this kind of thing is not the time to paraphrase. If they say they want someone with experience in analyzing documents, don't paraphrase that. Say, I have experience analyzing documents through X, Y, and Z. Because, like I said, you got to get past that gatekeeper.
Couldn't agree more. Definitely, when you're crafting your resume, cover letter, look closely at that job ad and what they're asking for, and say exactly what the job ad says. Put that in there exactly the way it is, and also quantify it as well. They want that. That's another thing they want. They want you to, how many publications you have, that kind of thing, or how many documents, how much time you spent doing things. Just be careful to be sure to quantify that as well. That's it.
Anything to add, Rahima? I see the hamster on the wheel.
Yeah, I actually haven't had issues experiencing bias between social science and humanities either, although I'm a business historian, so I sort of straddle that. But no, basically, I would say the only thing people haven't mentioned, which I'm sure they would going to, it seems kind of obvious. As soon as you have anything to add to a CV, add it immediately. As soon as your publication's accepted, as soon as you are accepted to a conference, something like that, add it to your CV. Just keep like a running CV on your desktop. I've heard that said before, and I was doing pretty good at it, but then I kind of lax on it, and then it was kind of a mess to go back. So just stay on top of it. Oh, and then I've heard some people recommend making a personal website as well with your CV and accomplishments. So depending on what your field you're in, maybe if you do a lot of field work, you can have like videos of, your work, or you can, display the journal articles you've been in, that kind of stuff. Or if you have any press, you can put that in there too. So if you do that, try and update it, because I have a personal website, but I haven't updated. I put some placeholder images. I was like, oh yeah, I'll get to that. And I've been meaning to get to that for like a month now. So try and kind of put it together sooner than later.
Echoing that about adding things to your CV, when I was a consultant and responding to proposals and putting together proposals, I kept a master CV that had everything. And then when it was time to do a proposal, I would go take that one and copy it, and I cut out the things that weren't relevant, so that I could always go back to the main one, the master CV, tailor it, and not lose things along the way.
I appreciate that comment so much, Lynn, about editing CVs. I actually recently updated mine because turns out when you submit IRB proposals, they want your CV. But what sort of things would you add and subtract to a CV to make it competitive for a non-academic job? I know academic jobs want to know your teaching and research experience, but what does that look like in museums, in, coding, those sorts of situations?
I'd say they're definitely like a resume and cover letter are definitely shorter than like some of your CVs. Again, it'll depend on the job. I guess with teaching, like a lot of people have teaching experience. I think for me, like try to translate into showing that you know how to manage people. That interpersonal skills. So it may not directly relate to the field you're going into, but I mean that teaching experience still matters. Cover letter, same thing. That's going to be shorter than the one you'd use if you're applying for an academic position. Just again, using those keywords that are in the job ad, and those emphasizing those specific skills that they mentioned that you have when you're applying. I know that's kind of super specific. Hope that was somewhat helpful, but we'll just stop there for now.
Any other CV thoughts from the panelists? Adding and subtracting is my question.
Well, mine's a little specific because I do design, so I try and make mine jazzy. So I put some kind of fun fonts and some minimal but stylistic elements so you could kind of get a feel that I like design. And sometimes, depending on the job, I've actually submitted both my career CV and then also had my academic CV. Sometimes I merge it. Like what we were saying earlier, you kind of take a little bit from some column A and column B and put it together based on the specific position, what they're asking for. And then finally, depending on where you're applying, a lot of companies, maybe not so much smaller nonprofits, but if it's a large organization, they're definitely going to use algorithms where they're just specifically pulling resumes that have keywords. So if, as Edward and Lynn mentioned earlier, use those keywords, be very specific in your resume, quantify what you're doing. Sometimes it can feel a little weird. You're like, I'm just saying what the job offer, or, the job ad is saying, but definitely put that somewhere in your resume. And then also you can elaborate a bit on it in the cover letter as well.
Awesome. So while we're on the topic of CVs and resumes, one of our questionnaires asked, when a posting asks for either a CV or a resume, what are your suggestions for which ones to submit?
I would say that in many cases outside of academia, they're not necessarily making a huge distinction between a CV and a resume. I don't know if other people agree with that, but that is my impression.
I guess I would just err on the side of whatever looks like it offers more with the job you're applying for. But I would try and make a conglomeration of both. I don't know. I'm not very good at either or. I'm like, oh, why not both?
I guess for me personally, when in doubt, especially for non-academic stuff, I just go with the resume. That's just my take on it. But
I'll take it. Thank you. All right. So I think we've covered CVs, resumes. Now let's talk about the thing that makes the capitalist world go round, money. One of our questioners asked, keeping in mind first generation, low income, non-traditional, students of color, salary is important. It's important to everyone, but especially those vulnerable populations. They ask, what kind of salaries are we talking about? And have you had to have multiple positions?
I would say it's a little bit of I would say salaries in the preservation field are not exceptionally high. It's a little bit hard for me to answer right now because I am in Alabama where the cost of living is somewhat lower than in a lot of the areas where people are asking questions about. So I think the salary ranges for a mid-level preservation, what I'll call cultural resources coordinators in the state are in the, I think, $30,000 to $50,000 range, $30,000 to $55,000 range for a mid-level. I would say as a consultant, I can't really recommend consulting to someone who does not have a financial cushion, because the pay is episodic. You can go 6 months without a check, just because of the nature of the billing process, and it's uncertain, and you have to cover your own health insurance. So it's a good option if you have a spouse, for instance, who has health insurance and can have kind of a steady income. And there are certainly people who do it as individuals, but it is definitely a challenge to do. But I will say it is a good side gig. If you have flexibility in your, your salaried job, it can be a good side gig to bring in a little extra money.
So I definitely have the background you're talking about. I've been working full time since I was undergrad. So I work, I didn't have any financial cushion. Part of the reason I am in encoding and IT based approach is because the pay is pretty decent. The pay range for my field, it depends. I mean, if you're like a full coding doing front end design, you can make a ton. But if you're, I would say maybe like between 60 to 100, depending on what your field and if you're doing, and it also depends on where you're working. Because if you're at a very small nonprofit or a very large company, you might go corporate. The range is very different. The pay packages are going to be different, benefits, things like that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
I definitely would encourage everyone to look at working for the federal government if you can. It's stable employment. I'm in the DC area. The salary's pretty good, and there's room to move up. Now I don't have like student loans or anything like that, like other people do. I went to a service academy for my undergrad time, so my experience and financial situation might be a little different than other folks, but generally, especially coming in with, at least a master's degree, you're going to at least start at, around the 60s or something. And keep in mind, that's the DC area. So, you got to adjust that cost of living. But I will advocate strongly for working for the federal government if you want some kind of stability, if you're interested.
Also, in the preservation field, I think the best paying government jobs are definitely from the National Park Service. And in the consulting field, it really varies widely there's also consulting firms, and I have not worked for a consulting firm in a long time, so I'm hesitant to say what the rates are now for that. And it really depends on what kind of, to a large extent, on what kind of consulting work they're doing in the historic preservation and cultural resource management field.
Another place, I was living in DC, and another place that if people are interested in those kind of fields, definitely look into the Smithsonian's. There's a whole bunch of them in DC, and they have wonderful opportunities, great programs, and I thought the compensation rates and the packages are great too. So just another place to look.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, outside of straight up museums or like being a NAGPRA officer or anything, I would have never thought of just like working for the government. So I appreciate that shout out for sure. Although National Park Service is also the first thing that comes to my head when I think of public history. So I don't know why I didn't connect that. All right. So our next questioner would like to know, what do you do when you want to change your career midlife? Like, what is the suggestions? And I want to know, what's the hardest part of transitioning out of academia and what's the easiest part?
So I'm kind of at midlife and I'm not planning a transition, so I don't really know how to answer that. But I mean, I transitioned from consultant to employee, but that was just a move within the same field. So I don't think that really counts. I would say the hardest part of leaving academia, that I think to some, and maybe I hope this has changed since I came out of graduate school, which was a while ago. I think there is a sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle indoctrination may be a little strong, that if you don't get a tenure track academic job, you're a failure. And I think it took me several years to really, even though I knew I made the conscious choice that I did not want to be in academia, it took me several years to really let go of that no, it's just, this is what I want to do. And you will still encounter that sometimes at some academic conferences. OAH is very welcoming, but I've been to other academic conferences where they ask me what I do and I tell them, and they sort of look at me like, okay. And then they quickly end the conversation and move on. And that is not a fun thing to experience. But after a while, you sort of decide, I came to realize that's a them problem. It's not a me problem.
I had a similar experience. I actually was planning on, when I first went into the PhD program, my goal was to get a tenure track job and teach. I really like teaching, but toward the end, I realized that the market's not so great. And honestly, I really love traveling. So it's difficult to do when you're teaching. So I had similar experience. So I guess I feel like I'm still in academia though, because I still go to conferences, I present my research. I had a book published. I'm working on another book right now. And so I feel like I have one foot in, one foot out, but I actually really like going to, like, I just went to the OAH again. It was so nice to be in person conference again. So it was just wonderful. I just love seeing all the panels and being part of that. But I feel like it was so relaxing though, because they didn't have to be like, oh, I have to network, I have to do all this stuff. No, I just got to sit back and watch our panels, just really enjoy myself. I met with some book publishers or like interested in my book. So that's always exciting. Got to see all kinds of great books. So I feel like I'm still in academia, but I don't have to deal with, we can be honest, like sometimes academia, there's some like rude egos and stuff like this and like weird department problems. And you'll sadly, anywhere you go, any kind of job, academic or not, that you might find that the department or office or whatever you work in has kind of a not so great environment. But one nice thing about remote work is I don't have to worry about that. So I just feel really lucky. I did have a trouble because I was feeling like a bit of a failure, like, oh, I didn't end up in a tenure track job, but I actively didn't even decide to pursue it. I was just happy with what I'm doing. And I realized, I'm just very fortunate to have the position I'm in. So why change it? I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just say the same thing. I try not to let that bother me either. It really doesn't. I'm kind of, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I'm still kind of living in both worlds. I still go to conferences. I want to turn my dissertation into a book one day. But there's not the pressure of like having to get tenure and stuff like that. You're doing something because you want to do it. So it's a bit different. But yeah, definitely don't let that bother you, I would say.
I also say I love going to conferences, and like Rahima and Edward are saying, you just get to sit back and enjoy it. But I will also put in a plug for connecting networking and conferences. I was on the OAH NPS collaboration committee, and which was a really valuable experience. But do keep in mind that the OAH and the National Park Service have a collaborative agreement. And as a result, the OAH is a wonderful place to network with National Park Service historians and talk to them and get to know what they're doing. And the OAH NPS collaboration is also a good place to look for opportunities to gain paid experience in writing reports for the National Park Service. And that then helps you build your CV towards potentially getting a job in the National Park Service or the State Historic Preservation Office, or museums, because they also do interpretive plans. So I would definitely encourage going to OAH and going to the panels that are endorsed by the OAH NPS collaboration, because there's a lot of good information at the OAH conference about NPS.
Y'all are just increasing my FOMO of having to miss OAH and Zoom into my panel due to COVID reasons. Sounds like I missed a whole bunch of awesomeness. And I like that you are, filtering sort of the good networking that can happen that's outside of academic jobs at conferences. And, that's one of the reasons I love OAH, because that is so readily available out here. So I appreciate that reflection. Are there any skills that you did not have when you came into your position that you had to learn? It's a personal roast moment. Not really. I'm joking.
All right, I'm going to be 100% real. So I lied a little bit at my job interview when they're like, oh yeah, do you know how to use Adobe programs? I was like, oh yeah, definitely. I immediately went home and went on YouTube and I watched so many tutorials. Within 2 weeks, I became Adobe expert. You can too. So I would, I hate to say, but some people are, don't do a hard upsell. Like I wouldn't lie and say I'm a great C++ coder, because I'm not. Like that's a little too much to learn one day. But I feel like Adobe programs, if you have to I'll expand the truth a little bit, make sure it's expansion you can do if you get that job and you can do it quickly. I'll just leave that at that. I think this is recorded. So. But I would say, don't be shy, shoot your shot, just go for it. But go for it in a reasonable, something you can do. So I wouldn't go and say, oh yeah, I can perform a pediatric surgery. No, I can't, but I can go on YouTube and learn some certain skills really quickly about coding. So
I think in that situation, like if you're asked about, do you know how to do X, and you don't know how to do X, I think I have on occasion said, I don't have experience with that, but I know enough about it to know that this is what I would need to learn in order to do that skill, and I'm willing to do it. Or I have, indicate hopefully you know what it is they're talking about. But indicate that you're willing to learn it and that you think you have some basic knowledge to build on to learn that skill.
I guess I want to say learning something new, but I had to relearn something that I knew before and kind of forgot. So I had kind of an IT background from my time in the Army. Hadn't really used that for like 5 or 6 years, and then kind of helped me solve some problems here in the museum with some of the collaborative work we were doing with like making a Microsoft SharePoint site, which is another skill that I now can have, relearned and can apply to on a resume for future jobs and stuff. So just always kind of looking out for those opportunities, like Rahima and Evelyn were saying about, expanding your skill set and everything. So.
Couldn't find my unmute button for a second. That is not a skill I have. Just kidding. So since we've talked about new skills, let's talk about old skills a little. You've mentioned that you should highlight and draw direct connections between your academic experience and, the job you're applying for in a cover letter. But what sort of experiences, skills, etc., from your academic life do you still use?
I'll just say the, researching and writing comps, I hate to bring up comps I know that's a touchy subject for some people, but being able to get through books quickly and, being able to learn a new field in naval history, that's helped me tremendously. Writing and compressing things into like complex ideas into, 100, 150 words. It's something I do every day. So, yeah.
I'd say also the breadth of knowledge. Yeah, my focus in my graduate work was the pre-Civil War South. And you would think that in Alabama, I would be using that all the time. But in fact, I don't use that all the time because most of the things that were built before this, many of the resources that were built before the Civil War have already been listed. So I do a lot of civil rights stuff. I look at a lot of civil rights nominations. But we've also got a project underway about documenting slave dwellings in Alabama that I'm reviewing, and that the historiography of slavery is coming in very handy because and also I know enough to know that what scholarship is outdated, even though I haven't been looking at the scholarship and keeping up with it in a long time. I know enough to know that it's moved on from roll Jordan roll. So it's that breadth of knowledge and having that that ability also to find secondary sources and to know what to look for, and just the research skills, being able to find documents, analyze documents, and my situation is we're recommending to people where they should go look to find the information that they need for the nomination. Coming back to the question about skills, I would say I've been doing this for a long time now, so in my current job, I can't think of a skill I didn't have, but going back, I would say one of the skills that I had to learn in order to get into this field, and I learned on the job, was how to describe buildings in detail. And it's a form of technical writing that you just have to learn on the job, and learn how to use your architectural glossaries. And but that was definitely a skill and a type of writing that I had to learn to get into this field.
I would say for my job, I actually have no editorial say, but I still, in dealing with manuscripts, because I'm processing them technically, I'll notice issues, or if there's like a glaring issue, I'll bring it up at least. Sometimes I'm often overruled, to be honest, but I do definitely the research and the writing, all the analytical skills, those are very helpful. And like I said, I still enjoy research and writing, and I do have my own personal book project, so that helps a lot. I don't know if that helps.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I kind of want to ask some like individual questions now, because I have like individual questions I have after you all presented. So I'll put Rahima last since you just talked. For Edward, I'm curious what it's like to work in a naval museum, and in that field, the sort of military history field in particular, because it feels vastly different. And also my only military history experience is like touring, the Naval Academy in Annapolis and all those, markers.
So I'd say it's a bit different. Work with a lot of former Navy people, so there's kind of like I don't want to say a clash, but like kind of like a clash sometimes of like, I'll just use the word clash. It's okay, it's fine. Like this kind of military background and civilian kind of culture kind of clashes from time to time, which is kind of interesting. From a subject matter standpoint, I'm more of a social historian with my training, but I try to bring some of that methodology into, more of the naval history, military history stuff, because I think it kind of humanizes the stories of the sailors more. I think that's brought a lot of good things for our interpretation, and really kind of showing one thing that military historians sometimes don't do well is the connections between, broader social, cultural, political, economic developments and broader U.S. history. So really what we're trying to do is show, U.S. naval history as a lens for looking at broader U.S. history. So they kind of bit different, but they kind of go together. They should be blended together more than they usually are. So that's what I try to do. Hope that answered your question somewhat.
No, it did. I was very curious about the military and civilian backlash sort of clash, as you put it. So I appreciated you touching on that. So for Evelyn, my question is, how does historic preservation sort of operate in the lifeblood of a museum or a state historical society, in terms of like, there's the library, there's the archivist, there's, the educational programming, and I know that you are also all of those things. So I'm just curious about how you see yourself in the ecosystem.
So we are actually we operate separately from so in the Alabama Historical Commission specifically, we have two divisions. We have a Historic Sites Division and we have a Historic Preservation Division. The Historic Preservation Division is the State Historic Preservation Office. So we, support the historic site staff, but for the most part, we are operating separately. And the State Archives in Alabama is a completely separate agency from us. So we really just focus on the preservation issues, which for us is less advocacy than administration of the federal programs like the National Register or the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credits, Section 106 review, which is part of the preservation law that requires that federal agencies take into account the impact on historic resources. We do a cemetery, and then we have some state programs we administer. So we have a cemetery register, a state historic register. Some of our staff do permitting for cemetery work on cemeteries and removal. We also have archaeologists who on staff, and so, but we don't actually interact a whole lot directly with like the archives or the historic sites unless they intersect with the preservation world. It's like a couple of our historic sites have grants from the National Park Service that require a nomination. So we're going to be working in-house, for instance, on a nomination for a building across the street from the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery, which is Alabama Historical Commission site. But that's because they have to do that, and we are all part of the same agency. So we support each other, but it's not a direct interaction.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the sort of map of the landscape of the agencies. So I was just really curious, like my knowledge of museums is like one semester of museum studies history. So I appreciate it a lot. My question for Rahima is, how did you sort of get into coding and get that sort of experience? Because the only experience I have is like when I applied for or got the OAH position, it was like, oh, you might have to do the website editing. And I was like, well, it better be some HTML coding because the only thing I've ever coded is my MySpace page. So how did you get in there? How did you get that experience? That sort of question.
I guess I've always been interested in IT stuff and coding, so I had that background, but I will say I'm not very advanced. When a lot of the stuff is automated now, so as part of it is just finding the best service and going with that. Sometimes it changes, like we used to use WordPress all the time, but I'm not a fan of WordPress. And they made some changes that made it difficult for journals and things like that to get picked up in various like Google Scholar and things like that. So part of it is just always, since I had the job, I have an interest in keeping the job. So I'm always learning more about the best ways to optimize our content and things like this. So I would say part of it is just, I had a general interest in it, and part of it is just professional development, taking those classes, learning about different options, different providers, things like this as well. So I don't know, not a great answer, but that's all I got for you. Sorry. We can ask more follow-up questions if you want.
No, that was a great answer. I assumed the answer would be I've always already done this thing, but I was just curious because, one of my assistantships, I work in the School of Public and Environmental Affairs here, and they are always talking about R and Stata and all of these coding platforms for their statistics work. And I'm like, I don't do statistics. I'm a social historian. So yeah, it's just always been interesting to me when people know more coding than a MySpace page. So I appreciate that very much. So slightly deviating off topic, there is a question related to sort of the academic job market, but that is also going to be in the professional development series. So we are going to ask it, and I would love to hear your reflections, but if this person feels that we don't answer their question, don't take it personally. So their question is, do you have suggestions on cover letters applying for adjunct history positions at community colleges at all?
I do actually. So I don't have specific information about what to put in your cover letter, but going back to the earlier discussion we had about networking, I found out that a lot of adjunct jobs, especially not just at community colleges, but other colleges, a lot of times they'll post, but they already have somebody in mind. So if you are interested in that, I would definitely encourage you to network, try and reach out beforehand or find I hate to say, but find somebody, that works there, some kind of in. That's not the case at every institution. So, but I would just, take my advice with a grain of salt. But I would say it definitely helps to know somebody there to get your foot in the door. Not all the time, but.
Would our other panelists? Okay, Evelyn, awesome.
It's not something it's not something I've ever applied for, so I don't really have any advice on that topic. Sorry.
Yeah, same here. Apologize.
No worries. I just want to make sure I ask the question. So I also have another question, which is escaping from my mind as I'm speaking, but I was curious about what it's like to interview for those jobs. Like, what sort of interview questions do they ask for non-academic jobs?
So how do you feel about Adobe? But no, I will basically it was just about my general interest in being in the PhD program helped greatly because it is an academic oriented organization. So they had conferences and journals and stuff like and books and things like this. So having that background helped tremendously. I think so since my background established that I had an interest and some ability in the field, that kind of helped me push the interview forward very quickly and say, okay, well, let's talk about your technical skills. What, this is what we have planned. How can you fit into that sort of thing? I'll let the other, I spoke a lot, so I'll let the other panelists speak about that more.
I'll just mention one that kind of stuck out to me. One of the questions they asked me about was, leading kind of working groups for developing the interpretive plan, which is not something I'd ever done before. But it's basically like leading, open discussions and things like that. And there I could kind of draw on my teaching experience to really answer that question. So that's one area where that became useful, and that's one of my main jobs right now. Is I've run 5 working groups pretty successfully so far, and there's still more coming up. So didn't really understand that question at the time, but when I got into the job, I saw why they asked it.
What I remember, a couple of things I remember being asked was sort of what was kind of my vision for the National Register program in Alabama if I were to get the job, and what would I want to accomplish in that role. And the other one was, I think, coming out of having been self-employed for many years, they asked me how I felt about whether I thought I'd be able to work within a bureaucracy that might not be very efficient. I'm not sure they said not very efficient, but they did want to know how I felt I would handle the transition from being self-employed to working within a bureaucracy where there were forms and there were procedures that had to be done. So that was a question. And I think that may translate also to people who are coming from a dissertation and going to a job. Sort of how are you going to make the transition from having unstructured time, a very flexible schedule, to having a schedule where you have to be potentially at your job, 8 to 4, whatever you have to do, because it is a different type of work in some ways.
Awesome. We do have another question in our chat. So we've talked a lot about how valuable the PhD is, but I noticed we also had a lot of MA graduates in the chat. But this person is asking, is the PhD in history necessary for non-academic historians?
In my field, absolutely not necessary. The vast majority of people who, every state has at least one National Register coordinator. Most of them do not have PhDs. I don't know exactly how many do and don't, but most of them do not.
same. And my the people that I've interacted with do not have. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Howard. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, basically same. For the people that I'm dealing with as far as administration, no, they don't have a PhD.
Yeah, same. That's. I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. Well, I will sort of almost close it here. We've had a great discussion, but I'll go around so you don't have to cut each other off. Does anyone have any final thoughts, starting with Evelyn?
I'm going to pass for now, but I'm going to say come back around one more time.
I will do so. Edward.
I'm just going to say I feel like I'm doing a disservice if I don't say, like, speak for myself, like, I'm very lucky and fortunate to have this position. A lot of people have trouble finding these positions, and you never know what the person on the end that's looking at your application, what they're looking for. So if you don't get something, don't ever take it as a sign that there's something wrong with you. It's a luck of the draw. You never know. So just, stay motivated and get out there and get it. That's the best advice I can give you.
Awesome. Rahima.
Okay, I have 2 pieces of advice. One, if you go to a conference or anywhere and you interact with somebody and if they willingly give you their contact information, please contact them. I was at the OAH. A couple of people I actively gave my contact information to, and they never got back to me, but I have like great opportunities for them. So if somebody is like, you have a nice interaction, they say, hey, please contact me, please do so. So if you're that person that I talked to at the OAH, the couple people, and you haven't contacted me, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn or here. Don't be shy and reach out. I very much was like that too. I was like, oh, nobody wants to talk to me. I'm so awkward, etc. Or especially as a newer scholar, I feel, you can feel very unsure of yourself. So I encourage people to feel comfortable and reach out and make those things, those connections, especially if somebody asks you, like actively gives you the information, you're not bugging them or anything. The second one is to, especially if you're in somewhat of a unique field, I'm a business historian, so there's a great business history conference, which is also affiliated with the OAH. But I also did communal studies. So I would encourage anybody here that if they have depending on their dissertation or their outside research interests, to seek out those smaller organizations. For example, I do communal studies as well. So there's a Communal Studies Association, and they just do wonderful stuff. I was so thankful to have found them because they gave wonderful research grants. They have wonderful awards, things like this. So please, whatever your field of interest is, definitely reach out. Through the OAH is a wonderful, that's the backbone. But don't be shy and look out for those other organizations as well. They can be a great source of opportunities, grants, things like this. So, and also thanks everybody for your time. I appreciate it. Just the level, you can see, I'm just so glad to be on this panel. Everybody here is so wonderful. I feel like we have a great camaraderie. So thank you so much for this.
All right, Evelyn, last words before Beth comes in.
Well, Alabama is certainly not for everybody. I will say, if you have the flexibility to move out of the major metropolitan areas and you're willing to do that, to go to a mid-sized city, to go to a state capital, you may find that there are a lot more opportunities and fewer people seeking those opportunities than you will find in some place like Washington, D.C., and particularly in my field, and I think in the museum field. Yes, there are lots of jobs in Smithsonian, but there are also a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who want those jobs. So, look at the mid-sized cities and what they have available, and try to make contacts there and get to know people, because they're really, when we have positions open, we don't have often a lot of qualified people applying. I also hear, I was talking to somebody from Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Site and Selma to Montgomery Trail. They're hiring park guides. Well, they're telling me they're hiring park guides to see if I know anybody who wants to be a park guide. So again, that sort of reinforces the networking thing. So if anybody wants to be a park guide in Alabama, let me know. I'll pass along the information. And you didn't ask this, but it's one thing I do want to say is that one of the things I love about my job is that I get to talk to people, and like I make people's day all the time because I'm interested in what they have to say. And I sometimes I have to say, no, I don't think the National Register is for you. But sometimes, for people, it is what they have worked for years to do, and they've dreamed of it. And being able to work with people like that. And we have a church that's in the process of being nominated that is associated with the civil rights movement. And the gratitude from that congregation for the assistance that we gave them is wonderful. And you don't get that working on your dissertation. And so I just want to say there's a lot of reasons to leave academia that are not just about using your PhD. You can really, I'm sure Edward and Rahima have similar things. If a visitor comes to the museum and you've made their day, there's a lot of rewarding things about leaving academia that are not just about the life of the mind.
Righty, thank you for your time. This was incredible. I appreciate you all. I will hand it over to Beth Marsh now.
Thank you so much, everybody. Edward, Lynn, Rahima, Ayoka, this has been a great discussion. For everybody who's still on here, please know that we have recorded this and we will be sending you a link to the recording as soon as it's available. Probably will be Friday of this week. And I will also include a link for the registration for the next webinar in the series, which will be on June 7th, Tuesday, June 7th at 3:30 p.m. And it is on how to navigate the Freedom of Information Act request process. So thank you so much to everybody who came today, and we'll see you soon.